Transformers Power of the Primes is fresh on shelves right now, and so I thought I'd talk about the first figure that I got. That being Deluxe Class Jazz. Jello again, Aaron here from My Turbo Reviews, and today I'm coming at you from deep beneath the mean streets of Johnston in the Turbo Cave. I've got my Titans Return figures on the shelf behind me, and I figured now is a good time to really dig into Power of the Primes. And we start with a toy that has dubious distinction. It's the Deluxe Class Jazz, and he's got a bit of controversy surrounding him. There's quite a bit of the toy that's made up of translucent plastic and painted over, tampographed over, and folks are concerned that it's not going to hold up so well over time. He also ushers in an era of slightly cheaper feeling plastic than what came before, and when I say before, I mean just a month or so ago we were getting new Titans Return figures, and even though it doesn't really look it, when I compare this guy to some of the Titans Return figures that I've gotten recently, still the plastic does feel a little bit thinner. It's not terrible though, and I think that's where there's kind of a divide in the fandom, because there are a lot of people balking at these figures without actually having them in hand because someone's told them, hey, they feel cheap, they're garbage, don't buy them. And instead of going out and figuring it out for yourselves, people are just taking somebody else's word for it, and I don't think that's fair to these new figures because they are really decent. Now, Jazz is infamous for something else, and just in case you haven't heard, I'm going to go over it very quickly. There is a tampograph on both of his doors. It's a square with a little Autobot symbol and some sort of text that can barely be made out underneath. The text itself is written in the made-up Cybertronian language, and when you translate the tiny little glyphs into English letters, it spells out MAGA, which is a slogan for the Trump campaign, standing for Make America Great Again. Now, Hasbro has gone on record as saying they didn't design it that way, that it somehow got slipped in there in between when they gave their final go-ahead for the design and when it was actually put into process. Right now, there's no way to know how accurate that is, and honestly, we'll probably never really know what happened. But it lends this guy a bit of infamy. I don't know if they're going to make a running change to the mold where they remove those glyphs, but I digress. This is a review, and I want to talk about the toy. Jazz's vehicle mode is pretty nice. It's not a Porsche, it's not really trying to be one. It's just a straight-up generic race car, from what I understand. I'm not a car guy, so please excuse me if I've somehow missed that this is supposed to be based on something real world. He's got his 4, which G1 fans will appreciate, along with the same stripes, which hopefully don't get Hasbro into trouble. I don't know how close they are to the real world racing stripes that are on the car that was the inspiration for Generation 1 Jazz. And he has his name emblazoned on his doors in place of the Martini logo, which the original actually had. As with a lot of modern Hasbro designs, Jazz's back is unfortunately completely barren of any detailing whatsoever. Wheels are again pegged in instead of on pins. It makes it so that he rolls, but not quite as smoothly as he would if the pins were there. Underneath you see some robot, but it's not really that bad. And honestly, I think Jazz is vehicle mode looks really nice. But of course, we're talking about a transformer here. And that means that this vehicle is also this robot. And Jazz pulls off his robot mode pretty decently, considering the gimmick that's hidden within the engineering, and I'll get to that in a little bit. Head is traditional Jazz with the visor painted in blue, and I defy any cat to say that it's not cool. The Autobot symbol from the front of the car ends up on his chest, as it should, and it's a good way to ensure that he's got an Autobot symbol showing in both modes. Paint apps on this guy are pretty well decent, and Hasbro remembered to include this silver paint, which I really, really like the look of. There's not much at all in the way of a backpack, which could go either way on a figure like this, and I'm glad that it looks the way that it does. Honestly, the only real gripes that I have with Jazz in this mode are the fact that the lower legs are wobbly just below the knees, and that's unfortunately due to the way the figure was designed and how the legs transform. The panels in the legs don't tab into anything. Also, his fists, I think, should be either painted or molded in black plastic, and it's really a shame that they overlooked that, because taking care of those two things would have made him stand out much more than he already does. Articulation-wise, he's got a rotation at the shoulders. Shoulders will swing out to the sides. The elbows are on ball joints, giving you a great range of motion. Hips are also on ball joints, although they do bump up against his backpack, and that limits his motion a little bit. Knees are on a hinge, and the head is on a ball joint, giving you a full turn and somewhat of a tilt back and forth. Jazz has a couple of accessories, first one being his shiny silver laser gun, which will fit nicely into either fist. Second one is a bit weirder. It's this thing right here, which some folks who remember Combiner Wars will feel a bit of nostalgia, because this does flip out to become a hand for Combiner mode, but not a foot though, just hands. But what it can also do is fit onto Jazz's chest, like so, as a bit of dubious armor, and a Prime Master can fit inside there if you so happen to have one, which I do not right now. Now, Jazz does have a gimmick, and he, like all of the other deluxes in the Power of the Primes line, borrows a page from Combiner Wars, because he can become either a leg, albeit with no foot attached to it at this time, or an arm. What the both of these are for will come into play at a later date when we get into the Voyagers from this line. Overall, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that you should definitely get Jazz. It's not perfect, and it pales somewhat in comparison to the Reveal the Shield figure from several years ago, but I think that Hasbro did a really decent job designing this guy, especially when you consider the arm-leg gimmick that he had to work around to begin with. I think it's a step beyond what we got in Combiner Wars, and I understand that there are reports of these figures being a little bit on the brittle side because of the thinner plastic and because of the translucent plastic used. I would say, as long as you're not manhandling your toys, you really should be fine, and it shouldn't stop you from going out and getting what is a very decent, if not the best, version of jazz. And as always, this has been Aaron from My Turbo Reviews saying catch you later.